Hey guys, happy Friday yet again. Here we are, and I thought, you know what? You guys seem to be enjoying them. Let's keep it going. Today, I'd like to talk to you guys about Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And no, I'm not going to make silly jokes about the name. I feel like that's pretty played out. Everybody always says, takes a cruise ship, takes Vancouver. Damn it, the name of the movie is Jason Takes Manhattan. This is another one of those stories that has to start with a trip to good old FYE. By this point, I had probably seen 6 of the first 8 Friday the 13th movies from Paramount, and I'll never forget, one of the things that I really liked about Jason Takes Manhattan was that deluxe edition DVD artwork. This is one of those instances where that one was never on the shelf too often. I don't know if they'd never restocked it that much, but I just remember always wondering, where's Part 8? I had looked up the movies online, and I was aware that there were 8 Friday the 13th films, and then new movies came after that under New Line, so I was like, where is this one? Finally, I did see Jason Takes Manhattan, and I was taken aback by the artwork on that deluxe DVD. I really enjoyed it. And looking at the back, I realized, man, I'm going to be in for something different on this one. I saw that the year was 1989, and I didn't realize the symbolism of the year 1989 for the series yet at that point. But I'll never forget my first time watching this movie. Now, to get a little bit personal, during my life, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had just graduated high school, and I was 2 semesters into college, and I was absolutely miserable. I had no direction. The thought of college did not excite me. I hated school, so I made this stupid decision to drop out and just get a job and started working wherever I could. Now, that Saturday morning, I had a good talk with my parents. I formulated a game plan and was trying to decide what I wanted to do. It was a rough morning and a rough conversation, and I assured my parents at the very least I will earn money and figure out what I'm going to do. But later that day was when I took that FYE trip, and that's when I picked up Jason Takes Manhattan. I was in need of something to just give me some comfort that night, and boy, was Jason Takes Manhattan the perfect movie for that. I'll never forget the conversation I had with myself in my bedroom watching it. I remember thinking to myself, man, I'm having a blast with this movie. It's clearly got all kinds of issues, but I feel like I can't say anything about liking this because I'd get made fun of. Back around 2009 and 10, you weren't aware of how many horror fans there were. I mean, you kind of were, but it's nothing like it is today. There is an audience and a vocal audience and a public audience for everything. But in 2009 or early 2010, I didn't know that there were diehard fans or just people that loved Jason Takes Manhattan on any level. So I just kind of felt like, I feel like I can't talk to anybody about this movie. So the idea for this movie was pretty clear. Rob Heaton had directed an episode or 2 for the Friday the 13th television series, and it seemed like the producers and Frank Mancuso Jr. were happy with the speed of his directing, the articulation, and how well he just worked with actors. So they came with him for the opportunity to do Friday the 13th Part 8. But for the first time, they decided to rock the boat, no pun intended, to take Jason out of Crystal Lake. You had 7 movies that had healthy profits, even though they started to dip down a little bit after Part 5. There was no reason to rock the boat, but for some reason they did. I'm not saying I'm upset about the decision. The decision to go to New York was probably pretty nearsighted, considering they don't put a lot of money into the Friday the 13th movies, which is also a part of the charm of those movies, but you gotta wonder, if we're gonna take Jason out of Camp Crystal Lake, let's go to the most expensive place in the United States to film, New York City. Rob went ahead and started making all these treatments and basically writing in scenes for every extremely expensive place you could think of to film in. Again, you would think that some of these people would have the foresight to know we can't do this. So after Rob made all these really cool storyboards and ideas he wanted to do, he would get the bad news that, hey buddy, you've got 2 days to shoot in New York. Imagine going through all of this work, writing all these storyboards, coming up with all these scenarios for your movie, only to be told, no, we can't afford it. But let's get back to my first experience of this movie. I didn't realize the profoundness that this was going to have on me at the time, but I knew I was watching something special. Being a musician, whenever I'm watching movies, I have a keenness to want to listen to the music in them. And I'll never forget seeing this gorgeous shot of New York City, and all of a sudden this beat kicks in to this late 80s sounding hard rock kind of anthem. If you would ask me what's one of the greatest rock songs in any horror movie of all time, quick answer is Darkest Side of the Night. The vibe of that opening credits is something that seems so much more dated, but not necessarily in a bad way, than anything else from a Friday the 13th movie. And that's what's kind of interesting to me. I'm not exactly saying that a lot of the Friday the 13th movies are timeless. You can clearly tell the era they were made, but there's something about Jason Takes Manhattan that feels so keenly late 80s, which gives it a unique identifier for me when watching these movies. Then we see this high school graduate couple on the boat getting ready to have some fun when we find out where Jason's at after the events of Part 7. You could almost almost argue that Jason's not really dead, considering he was just pulled down by an old man in the end of part 7, but sure enough, there he is laying under a bunch of wood with a big power cable that gets hooked right on him when an anchor from the boat goes on top of him, electrocuting him and bringing our favorite slasher back to life. Now, right away, I think one thing that people love about Friday the 13th Part 8 is the look of Jason in this movie. Now, there are some great looks of Jason, but something about Part 8 is so awesome. He's got this really slimy, gross look, which honestly is the one thing about this movie I think was done in a perfect light. For him to be covered in goo and slime and everything, being underwater and looking completely waterlogged with his skin was something I loved. And there's something about that juxtaposition of that dark, gooey color and this gorgeous kind of burnt gold hockey mask that he wears. That visual we see of Jason on the boat as we pan up is awesome. Now, here's one of the most interesting things you don't hear people talk about a lot with Jason Takes Manhattan. We see the boyfriend getting stabbed by the harpoon, but in the movie, those yellow covers over the cables are right near the harpoon when it stabs the boy, and they get covered in blood. Did any of you guys think that was the guy's guts that were coming out of him instead of these yellow harpoon cable covers? I'm kind of sad now realizing that that's what that was instead of his guts, but realizing how strict the MPAA was at the time, I probably should have known better. But it's a cool effect nonetheless. You get the sense that his guts are out of his stomach. To be totally honest with you guys, I'm having a hard time remembering watching this film for the first time if I was upset that most of this movie took place on a boat. I was so in love with the character of Jason at this point, quite frankly, I probably would have watched him play a game of chess for an hour and a half, but it is quite noticeable now, years later, that the majority of the film takes place on a boat. I've kind of come to grips with that, and I understand why, and for me, it's just really hard to be critical of the people involved or Rob Heaton because of this. The fact of the matter is, they told him where the movie was going to take place, and they gave him X amount of dollars. What else was the guy supposed to do? Like, I kind of get it. The death scene in the dance hall is really cool because it's more of a brutal, old-school scene where a girl gets choked out and slammed down on the mat. One of my favorite death sequences is when Tamara notices Jason before Jason even notices her. In a lot of scenes in Friday the 13th, Jason sneaks up on people and takes them out. Now imagine you see this guy before he sees you and you know now, oh my god, my time is up, this guy's coming for me. And a cool behind-the-scenes fact, Kane Hodder describes that when he threw Tamara into the window, it was supposed to completely shatter. But it didn't, and instead, in a quick reaction, he went up and punched the glass, and to continue the scene off in a proper way, told Rob, well, Jason would probably then pick up one of those shards and then stab her and kill her. And in this case, I give Kane a lot of props. He made that scene better. But there are some extremely goofy kills that, quite frankly, probably should have been reshot. The worst kill I've ever seen in the series is probably in this movie. When the captain of the ship, which is Sean's dad, gets killed, the machete is not only backwards. If you watch it closely, he barely, and I mean barely, even makes contact. Which wouldn't be a huge deal if it wasn't such a close-up shot, but I get a kick out of that scene every time. I can't help but laugh, and I guarantee you, back in the day in the movie theater, people probably laughed at that too. It's impossible not to. I mean, when I say he barely touches it, he may not even touch him at all. It's really, really noticeable. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's basically a Crazy Ralph tribute character or a ripoff, however you want to perceive it in this movie, right? Talks the same way Ralph does with this voyage is doomed, you're all doomed. I guess that's kind of cool. I imagine that's some sort of a tribute to Crazy Ralph in this movie. So it's now been public knowledge that we learned that most of this film was shot in Vancouver. One thing I'll actually compliment about this movie is I feel like the New York that you see in Jason Takes Manhattan is somewhat of an animated version of early 80s, late 70s, seedy, grungy, crime-ridden New York. If you watch movies like Basket Case, you can see the authentic feel of what I'm talking about. But in Jason Takes Manhattan, I feel like they're trying to do something in that style, but it's a little bit more animated and over the top. What's really mind-boggling to me is how in Jason Takes Manhattan, we see Jensen DeGette's character, Rennie, actually get shot up with heroin. I mean, it's bad enough that she got taken by these guys, but the fact that they actually shoot the poor girl up, what the hell was that all about? But Jason acts as some sort of a vigilante in this movie too. When you actually see those two thugs get taken out and one of them gets his head slammed into one of those pipes, that's pretty cool. But the poor girl, man, she's been through enough, and now these guys are going to shoot her up with heroin? Jesus, man. None other than Ken Kersinger was the stunt double for Kane Hodder in this film. And it's really noticeable when you see Ken Kersinger in here. He's noticeably taller than Kane. And his walk in this movie was absolutely pathetic. I mean, it really was. It really goes to show that Kane put a certain set of animation towards Jason that really gave the character life in a way that no other Jason had. It may not be everybody's favorite, but for these movies, I think Kane's Jason works perfectly, especially Jason Takes Manhattan. Now, the character of Julius may not have had that incredible scene of him boxing Jason in Madison Square Garden like Rob Heaton might have wanted, but the scene on top of the rooftop where Jason takes the guy's head off, I actually think is probably a highlight of the series, especially a highlight of the film. I really do enjoy that. There are certain things in this film that were not budget restrictions, like the death of the captain of the ship, like I talked about, but for the most part, I feel like Rob did everything he could with a minuscule budget. A $5 million movie in 1989 still isn't that much money by then, much less today. I like Rob. I think he's a really likable guy. If you watch him in interviews about Jason Takes Manhattan, he seems pretty relatable and down to earth. I'm glad he knows that there's a big fan base for his movie. I can't help but think that a lot of Friday the 13th fans, including myself, might just kind of forgive things, because if you look at Jason's undermask in this film when he gets the toxic waste thrown on him, his face just kind of looks like a sad/happy jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. It's certainly not the best design we've seen, especially if you look back to the previous one where the undermask of Jason is incredible. Now, Rob Heaton has talked about he wanted to make an ending to where they could not make another Friday the 13th film because they told him they weren't going to make any more. And other people interpret the ending of that was Rennie just kind of hallucinating, seeing Jason as a young boy at the end because apparently Jason tried to pull her under the water when she was younger. I don't think that's too far of a stretch to make that connection, but interestingly enough, I've never heard Rob Heaton talk about that. Another thing I noticed about this film that's really cool is when we see the ending of the film happen, it's just about to be sunlight, and when Rennie and Sean are walking out of the frame with her dog, by the way, the song Darkest Side of the Night starts playing. But what's really cool about the song is it has a different feeling when you hear it at the end. The way the song sounds in the beginning of the movie and the way the song sounds at the end of the movie are two totally different vibes, which is magical to me because it's the same exact song just playing again. Watching Jason Takes Manhattan is just a really fun, relaxing experience, and when you binge the film, seeing Part 8 becomes a lot more symbolic for you. I think there's a lot of symbolism in the movie, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Part 8, even though I've kind of done so in the past. This movie represents the end of an era in a really big way. When you think about Friday the 13th, I think the heart and soul of the series is the 1980s. It started in the 80s, and then in a big way, it ended in the 80s. Now, I know that things went on with New Line in the 90s, but the last movie called Friday the 13th, besides the remake, but the last Friday the 13th, is Jason Takes Manhattan, and it was in 1989. The last Paramount Friday the 13th movie is Jason Takes Manhattan in 1989. Really, with Friday the 13th, I think it defines a decade like no other series. It's incredible to me, and the symbolism of Jason Takes Manhattan just brings a warmness to me when I think about it so much. And I'll never forget one year for Halloween, they were playing the Friday the 13th films on Sci-Fi, and they were playing them throughout the weekend. Halloween was on a Monday, and on Sunday night, it was almost like the stories I would hear like Pizzal talk about when he was a kid. When the series would start a marathon on a Friday, well, when Part 8 came on, that represented it was the end of the marathon, and it was Sunday night. Tomorrow, you had to go back to school. In my instance, I had to go back to work. And I'll never forget sitting there with my dad, who was having a good time watching these movies, and we watched them all weekend, and getting to Part 8, and it was 9 o'clock at night. The movie was about to end, and I reflected on the weekend I had, watching these movies that I had just formed a huge love for, and getting to experience it with my dad and my brother, and watching them on TV was a really fun experience, and realizing, man, what a great time. But unfortunately, tomorrow, it's back to work, back to reality. And being able to watch them in real time, knowing I can't pause, I can't do this, I've got to just watch them, it makes it a different experience. It represents the end of an era in a smaller way there too. It's the end of the weekend. It's the end of that Friday the 13th marathon. Monday starts a new day and a new chapter. And I think in one way, those representations make this movie very special to a fan. Sure, the movie could be better. Maybe they could have given it more money. Maybe they could have fixed some things that are not budgetary issues. But the movie represents so much to us. The end of an era, the end of Paramount's era, the end of the Friday the 13th era. It also has one of the greatest horror movie posters ever. And I'm specifically talking about Jason hovering over the city with those gorgeous hues of red and blue all throughout it. But I want to say what the biggest compliment is that I can give, despite the fact that Part 8 takes out one of its biggest representations, which is kids at a camp getting killed by Jason, this movie still feels like a genuine Friday the 13th film as much to me than any of the previous 7 movies. And that is something that is not lost on me. Could have easily done things in this movie that made it feel like something else, but this movie has the essence of a Friday the 13th film to me as much, if not more, than some of the previous 7 films. And that deserves a big round of applause in my opinion. Jason Takes Manhattan kicks ass. And as I like to say to the haters of this movie, in a fun way of course, Jason Takes Manhattan does not suck. You do. Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.